I'm a trained counselor who has helped countless drug addicts and alcoholics come back from the brink of death. I believe fully in Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and the 12-step program. The full acceptance of these steps and the meaning that comes from believing in a higher power has created literal miracles in front of my eyes. I have seen homeless alcoholics who were months away from dying, shaking wretches of people with jaundiced eyes and wet brain, but after a year of AA and sobriety, they were some of the most confident, happy, and spiritual people I had ever known. They would give you the shirt off their back, and they constantly volunteered to save others from the brink of death. Some of them became staples of their community, devoted church members and deacons entrusted with large sums of money, and not one of them I knew ever betrayed the trust of the community had in them after their recovery. AA and NA gave their lives meaning and, over time, sometimes gave them almost total inner peace. But during the recession caused by the global pandemic, I lost my job. I became desperate and applied to hundreds of jobs, absolutely anything related to counseling or helping addicts. Then one day, I got a call. "Hello, may I speak to Jonathan?" a deep male voice said on the other end of the line. Speaking," I said. "Hi there, Jonathan. My name is Winston. I work for a company that is seeking highly qualified counselors such as yourself. Would you be interested in coming in for an interview?" he asked. And while I was fairly desperate, I also knew that I had to ask the most important questions for any potential job. "How much is the starting pay, if you don't mind me asking?" I asked bluntly, and Winston chuckled slightly. "Oh, it's $80,000 a year," he said. I smiled inwardly, excited about the new prospect. Most of the drug and alcohol counselors around New England made far less than that, despite the fact that the job required a college degree and years of schooling. We made plans to meet, and I went in for an interview and was hired on the spot. I was to begin immediately. Winston was a mountain of a man, at least 6'6", with shaved head and tattoos all over his body. His muscles looked like they had been sculpted out of marble, but he was also quite nice, smiling and laughing all the time as he showed me around the counseling building. As we neared the end of the tour, he brought me to the room in the basement where a sign had been posted on the door that said, "Meeting in progress, come in." He opened the door slowly, and I saw a room composed of all men. They sat in chairs that faced the podium at the front, and a man was speaking there. "Thanks to this program, I've been clean for 6 months now," he said sheepishly. He was a small man with huge glasses and balding brown hair and a pudgy belly. "I never thought it'd be possible, but with the grace of God and the help from all of you, I've done the impossible. I stopped killing people. Well, women. I barely even get the craving anymore, and when I do, I call my sponsor. He's there before I know it, taking the gun or the knife out of my hands and talking me down before I can go through with it. It helps, because I know he knows what it's like. All the anger, the rage, and the feelings of being so small. He's been there before, and having someone who knows what it feels like, really, it's a miracle. Growing up, if I ever talked about my feelings, my dad, he would beat me. He'd put me in the hospital. He even broke my nose a couple times. Another time, when I was 7, he put me in a coma for a few weeks. He fractured my skull in 2 places. So, I learned quickly to never talk about my feelings, never to cry or complain. I just bottled everything up inside until it exploded. Nods of agreement and solidarity passed through the room. Winston led me over to a chair in the back of the room and had me sit down. I thought about what the man had said. It seemed ludicrous. Was he really talking about killing people to a group of fellow addicts? I had no idea what to think. I had heard confessions in AA from people who had hit pedestrians with their cars and left the scene without stopping, due to them being drunk and afraid to go to prison. But this sounded totally different. The man finished his story, and the apparent leader of the group, a tall black man with a shaved head, got up in front of the group. "All right, thank you for sharing, Douglas," the man said to Douglas, the pudgy man with the huge glasses. Douglas went and sat down. I looked at the name tag on the black man's shirt. It read, "Hi, my name is King." King reached into the cloth bag next to the podium, pulling out some round circular coins that I recognized instantly as sobriety chips. "And as usual, at the end of every meeting, we'd like to hand out chips that recognize people's lengths of sobriety," he said in a deep baritone, smiling widely, his face friendly and unassuming. "For Leon, we have a 10-year sobriety chip," King yelled, and everyone in the room stood up, applauding. A nondescript, elderly white man got up from the center of the room, smiling sheepishly as he went to the front, shaking King's hand and taking his token. "For Douglas, we have a 6-month sobriety chip." The pudgy man got up and went to the front of the room, taking the chip and sitting back down. "And last, but not least, for Anton, we have a 24-hour chip." A white man with a goatee got up and grabbed his chip. "The first 24 hours are always the hardest, as we all know," King said, and the room murmured in agreement. "One day at a time, though. That's all we can do." The meeting ended with the Serenity Prayer. "Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change," and everyone began to disperse. I turned to Winston. I'm confused," I said, and he laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed across the room. "This is a newer group," he said. "A 12-step program for those addicted to murder, serial killing, and spree killing, anything like that. We have found that, like with drugs and alcohol, prisons don't really help reform these poor addicts. They don't get any of the professional or psychological help they need while incarcerated. So we started a group here instead." "So these guys, they actually kill people?" I asked, horrified, and he nodded. "Well, they used to," he said. "Some of them have been in recovery for decades. Some of them are brand new at it. And this is what we hired you for. To work with these men. To really help save their lives. And to keep them on the straight and narrow." He nodded as if to himself. "It won't be an easy job, surely. But that's why you're getting paid more than other counselors in the area. I'm sure you're up for the challenge, right?" I had to think about it. I really didn't know if I was up for the challenge of this caliber. But then again, what other job prospects did I have? I needed the money to pay my rent. Otherwise, my 17-year-old daughter and I would end up on the streets. Sighing, I nodded. "Okay, yeah, I'm up for it." And so I agreed. Blood covered the room of the floor in front of me. I looked from Leon, with his white hair and wrinkled face, to the barely recognizable mass of blood and organs on the floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jonathan," he said, crying into his hands. "I relapsed. I don't know what happened. I was totally fine one minute, then this idiot came out of nowhere, cutting me off in traffic and flipping me off for no reason. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting him. I followed him, really just to ask for an apology. Instead, he started swearing at me and calling me all these horrible names, and I kind of blacked out." "It's okay, Leon," I said, patting him on the shoulder. "Relapsing is part of the healing process. All we can do is try to figure out what went wrong this time, so we can work harder next time to prevent this from happening again." 10 years of sobriety down the drain," he screamed, falling to his knees, getting blood all over his blue jeans. I sighed and backed up to the entrance of the room and called Winston. "Yeah, I might need a little more help here, on the basement level of the counseling building. Leon had a relapse and he's in a really bad state. Do you know who his sponsor is?" After cleaning up the scene, I was talking to King and Winston about Leon. "Why do you think he brought his victim here to the counseling building?" I asked. And they shrugged. "This is where they're most comfortable," King said, shrugged. "This is where they have friends and they can talk openly. Many, they just instinctively come back here during times of struggle. I really don't know." Just then, my phone started ringing. I looked down to see the name of my daughter on the screen. Becky. I went out to the hall and answered it. "Hey Becky, what's up? I'm at work right now," I said, and she sighed. "Dad, do you know this guy named Douglas?" she asked. A chill ran down my back. "Yeah, why do you ask?" I said, my voice rising in pitch. I could feel my heart spreading up to my chest. Something felt very wrong about this phone call. Well, he's here, asking for you," she said, and I gasped. "Becky, get far away from him," I said quickly. "Call the police, get the gun out of the cabinet in my room, lock the door, and stay there until the cops arrive. Got it?" Someone else responded. "Hi, Jonathan," a male voice said through the cell phone. "You have a very pretty daughter, by the way. I think I'll enjoy this." "Get away from my daughter, you piece of shit!" I screamed into the phone, and Douglas laughed. Then I heard a gunshot and the line went dead. I started sprinting through the building towards the parking lot outside. My house was only a 5-minute drive from the counseling building, and I prayed I could get there in time. "Please, God, let her be alive," I wailed, running as fast as I could. I ran into the house, seeing a trail of blood leading from living room to the basement. I gasped in horror. Visions of Becky's dead body, shoved into a barrel or cut it into pieces with a chainsaw, all flipped through my mind in rapid succession. I followed the trail of blood to the basement where the light was on, and what I saw there stunned me to no end. Becky stood over the head of Douglas. She was cutting off his head with a bandsaw, whilst whistling to herself, an angelic smile on her smooth, placid face. There was a drain in the basement floor, and she let the blood flow into it as she cut the body into pieces, throwing each piece into a plastic barrel. "Becky, my God, what are you doing?" I yelled, and she turned around, a look of happiness and bliss in her eyes. "Just something I enjoy doing, Daddy," she said, smiling widely. "He's not my first, you know. You had nothing to fear. Once I saw this loser sneaking around in our backyard, I scoped out the house. I just went to your room and grabbed your handgun and hid it in my hoodie. He thought he was so smart, but really, he was the easiest kill I've ever had." She laughed. I quickly walked over to her, embracing her in a hug. "I'm just glad you're alive," I said, tears beginning to drip down my face. My vision turned blurry as waves of emotion overtook me. The next week, I was heading to work, Becky in the passenger seat. She was complaining, as teenagers often do. "I don't see why I have to do these stupid groups," she yelled at me, and I sighed. "Look, you have an addiction problem," I said to her. "I know you don't know it yet, but teenagers never realize it. Hell, even adults are often in denial about their problems, Beck. I just want you to go talk to these people. See if you can't relate to what they're having to say. You said you've killed, 4 people already?" She nodded glumly. "I'm just worried about you, sweetie. I don't want this addiction to take over your whole life. You're far too smart for that. You could go to college, be a doctor or an engineer, or anything you want. But not if you let this addiction ruin your life." She let out a grunt of expiration. "Fine, I'll go. Daddy, will you be there with me though?" "Always," I said. I started dating my most serious boyfriend when I was a junior. I'd gone out with plenty of guys before, but this was different. Mainly in the aspect that I really liked the guy. Before, it was just kind of something to do, you know? It was never a big deal until I met Judas. I had a crush on him from the beginning. I don't know what it was about him. He was attractive, but not a showstopper. One of those guys who looks like a movie star. There was just something about him that pulled you in, like a magnetic force. He was the kind of guy who you stared at in class but never made a move on. He had that kind of face that you doodle in your notebook without noticing. Anyways, I started dating him near the end of the year after I finally got the courage to ask him out. God knows how. He was a super nice guy, polite, funny, a little socially awkward, but it wasn't a huge thing. And eventually, he ended up being the guy to take my virginity. But that's another story. So yeah, Judas was my first everything, pretty much. Or the first one who was real. And then he ended up moving away again. Something about his family job or whatever. And I never saw him again. Ironically, the first day that he left was the day that my morning sickness started. At first, I thought it was the flu because it came with these awful pounding migraines, but there were no other symptoms. No chills, no fever, nothing. So absolutely scared shitless, I went to Costco, bought a pregnancy test, peed on the stick, and when 2 lines appeared, I dropped it in the toilet and flushed it down, then threw out the whole box. So, now I was pregnant. This posed a huge problem. Seeing as I was 17 and my parents would literally kill me, I'd had a strict Catholic upbringing, and premarital sex was to them what murdering someone with your own hands would be to other parents. I whipped up my phone and Googled, and this is seriously the first thing that my brain told me to do: abortion costs in California. The results were unspecific and mentioned healthcare insurance, which instantly brought to mind my parents going over the bills and seeing "your daughter's abortion" in big red letters, so that was out of the running. My only options were to miscarriage or to run away. Over the next few weeks, as my vomiting increased so much that at one point I had to convince my mom that I was bulimic, I found that I wasn't hating the prospect of having a baby. At night, I was extra careful lying on my stomach, which was ridiculous, because at that point there wouldn't have been much more than a clump of cells. I found myself talking to the baby idly, telling it about my day, and I even decided that if it was going to be a girl, I'd name her Maya. But I swear, I could hear her talking back sometimes. When I told her about my day, I could sometimes hear this reedy little voice responding, offering comfort, telling me that she loved me. I thought it was a normal thing to hear your unborn kid talking to you in your mind, and the faster she grew, the more she spoke, and the more defined her words became. And she grew fast. I even Googled it to make sure that it was normal, which it certainly wasn't. Baby bumps aren't supposed to be noticeable until well into the 2nd trimester, but by my 7th week, I had noticed that I had trouble fitting into some of my looser jeans. I began wearing bigger sweaters, which I could fortunately justify with the fact that it was now January, but I chewed my nails to shreds, fretting about what I would do when March came around. I don't remember the first time the baby moved, but I do remember the unease that grew each time after that. It wasn't simply little kicks. At times it felt like the baby was physically trying to rip me open from the inside. By 16 weeks, I spent days on end lying in bed clutching my stomach, my insides rolling as the child inside me jostled violently. Sometimes, when it got particularly bad, I could see it happening in the mirror, seeing reptilian ripples travel across my stomach, back and forth like the lashing of a tail. At 20 weeks, I started vomiting this gooey black phlegm. It coated the inside of my mouth and left a foul funk on my tongue that I could never get rid of, no matter how much water I swigged or how much times I cleared my throat. Sometimes, I got angry at the unborn child inside my womb. I thought that she was purposefully trying to ruin my life, that she made me this sick on purpose. The very thought of it just wanted to make me cry, but I hadn't been able to produce tears in a while. I don't know why. Maybe it was the hormones or something. I always felt embarrassed when flashes of rage traveled through me in responses to Maya's movements. I was going to be a terrible mother. When I was 6 months pregnant, my bump became less of a bump and more of a prominent bulge. My stomach was distended and covered in veins. My skin began to look more sickly pale, and my appetite stopped entirely. Strangely, though, I was eating less and less. Maya got more and more active. The movements were so violent, and sometimes she would physically jerk me forwards. Some mornings, it became routine to wake up and peel layers of flesh that flaked off my belly during the night, as if I were rotting from the inside, and the phlegm didn't stop either. One night, Maya would not calm down no matter what I did. I sang to her, I drank warm milk, I cried hysterically, I listened to music, and still she thrashed inside of me as if enraged, flaying me from within. I was in tears, frustrated to the point of hysteria, so much so, in fact, that I dug my nails into my stomach and let out a guttural groan of frustration, and my skin was so papery and thin that I ended up ripping away a section of flesh the size of a playing card. And that was the first time I felt it. This dark, ravening force deep within me, urging me forward, urging me to eat it. This black hunger was spoken in Maya's voice, whispering deep within me, a little girl's voice, begging me to feast on my own torn stomach, on my own hot, thick blood. I tried it again, sinking my nails into my belly, carving up wedges of myself, and once I allowed myself to do it a second time, I lost it. I was unable to stop myself from pulling away lumps of tissue, not just little flakes, but whole palmfuls of the stuff, shredding my pregnant tummy into bloody strips as I bit my left hand and kept myself from screaming in agony. I couldn't stop myself. I kept ripping myself apart, hot tears running down my face, blood staining the sheets of my legs and the hem of my shirt. I had to stop when I looked first at my hands, soaked to the knuckle in crimson, and then at my belly, which was covered in deep, whitish pink lacerations and spilling gore all over my pretty purple sheets. Shakily, I covered it up again with my shirt, pressing the fabric against the stingy incisions. And then, that was the strangest part. I noticed the actual hunks of discarded skin littering around me and felt the strange hunger. And before I realized quite what I was doing, I was eating my own flesh. It was tangy and metallic with blood and a little salty, though mostly tasteless. My teeth sinking through it easily. It slid so smoothly down my throat. From inside my stomach, Maya finally lay still. I knew that this was not normal. There was something wrong with me and with my baby. But God, if she would just finally stop twiddling inside of me like a snake and stop forcing me to vomit everything in my stomach every night, then so be it. Strangely calm, I went downstairs. It was probably midnight and my parents were fast asleep. I took a carving knife out of my kitchen cabinet and rotated it slowly into the moonlight streaming through the window. Then, before I could stop myself, I raised the knife and brought it down hard on my thumb, cutting 5 inches into the skin. The pain wasn't like I was expecting. It wasn't just raw, scorching, fiery misery. It was a strangely clean feeling, shiny, like the blade of the knife. I don't know how to explain it. And I couldn't stop. I was physically compelled to bite myself hard enough to bleed to stop my screams from coming out as I sawed through my bone and cut my finger off. Maya spoke again, in this soft little girl's voice, hungrily, desperately. Eat. Eat. I put my own bloody finger into my mouth and bit down hard, feeling my teeth crunch through bone. Warmth flooded my mouth as I gulped it down, nail polish crumbling down my throat. God, it hurt, but I felt so satisfied. More, that horrible whisper begged deep in my mind. But now, I was staring at the knife again, its blade lined with a slick of scarlet. Call me crazy, but something about it was so seductive that I just spent maybe 3 minutes staring at it, turning it over slowly in my hand, admiring the blade. I could feel myself getting wet looking at this weapon that moments before had literally severed away part of my body. I was still strangely calm, just aware of my skinned, raw stomach and the stump of my thumb that smeared every surface with blood. I felt sly, almost snake-like, as I crept back up the stairs and to the bathroom, patching myself up with rubbing alcohol and sterile white bandages, like I was in the hospital. All the while the knife was lying on the counter, glimmering in the light. I took the blade back up to my room, closed the door, and sat down on the bed with it, tracing its blade over my thighs. Not breaking skin, but just barely touching it, trailing spirals and stars over my skin. My heart started to pound, and I felt myself become more and more aroused by the second. It was only when I noticed the way I was digging the blade deeper and deeper into my skin, sending beads of blood rolling down my calf, that I felt my senses return to me. Terrified, I dropped it on the bed, getting to my feet, and in response, Maya slithered inside me, filling my mind with unintelligible murmurs. I was shaking, drenched in cold sweat. Quickly, I shoved the still bloody knife under my bed, a hand clamped over my mouth, wanting to retch my guts out. I can't explain what I was thinking then. All I know is that I was in some weird trance, and only now that I'd resurfaced, and that while I was running the blade over my legs, I'd been so tempted to shove the knife inside of me, blade up. I don't know how I managed to sleep that night, but I did, and life continued. The urges vanished for a little while. My appetite was still gone, and I was looking worse and worse for wear, and I couldn't possibly hide my pregnant belly. My mother knew. Maybe she knew the entire time. I could tell by the pained looks she shot me and the way she sometimes had to cover her eyes to stop her tears when she saw me. But my father was mostly oblivious. He was concerned about my bloating, and because he was certain in the notion that his daughter would never defy the scriptures and perform most unholy acts with a man before I was wed, he took me to the doctor to see if I had a tumor. And who would have guessed? I was well into my 3rd trimester. Wow, what a surprise. He took it much, much better than I expected. All the way home, I cried and begged him to speak to me, but he refused to say a word. His face was drained of all color, and he kept shaking his head and muttering under his breath. The moment we stepped foot into the house, he was scurrying up to the bedroom to blab to my mother. He came downstairs not 30 seconds later and slapped me so hard that I saw stars and my ears rang. He screamed at me for 3 hours, calling me a disgrace, a horrible child, a whore, a filthy harlot, a blight on the family, and names much worse than those. I tried to contain my sobs as I told him about Judas, and how I wanted to get an abortion, but at the very words his face turned purple and his screaming started again. By the end of the night, I was curled up in my bed with my hands over my ears, only Maya for company. I was shocked that they didn't kick me out of the house entirely, but the worst that they had done was take away my phone and ban me from any kind of socialization, including school. I didn't find that out until the next day, when I woke up at noon and ran downstairs in a panic, only to have my mother tell me, ashen face, "We've withdrawn you from education right now. You've chosen to sin, and now we must bring forth the product of your mistake." I was in shock. How'd you manage that? I was in shock. How'd you manage that? "We'd withdrawn you," she repeated. "Wait, did you drop me out of school?" I demanded. Tears formed in her eyes and she turned away and didn't say a word to me. I'd fucked up, majorly, but that goes without saying. All the while, I was getting more and more scared of myself and the strange urges that overtook me. Now that I wasn't at school, I spent the whole day alone with myself, and with Maya, and with the knife under my bed. 3 days. That's how long I resisted the pangs in my stomach before I finally pulled it out. Somehow, with all the pregnancy and sanity, my missing finger had gone unnoticed. Another blessing of my oversized hoodies. But I was actually aware of how much harder it was to grip things with only 4 fingers. So this time, I pulled off my clothes and, naked in my room, dug the edge into my leg and plunged it in up to the handle before digging upwards again, losing a slab of meat so large that the amount of blood that emerged when the knife came out was dizzying and nearly made me pass out. My skin and bone tasted so good. I ate like a wild animal, smearing my face with viscera, bawling the entire time. And when I had finished that off, I shoved the knife back in, cutting away swaths of my leg. First one, then the other, and then hacking away parts of my arms, my chest, and my butt, until finally I was lying on the floor in a pool of my own blood, unable to move, feebly licking my own wounds, literally lapping up the copious amounts of gore spilling out of me. Of course, my mom came running, bursting inside. She saw my entire body coated in scarlet, the knife lying next to me with its blade and handle dyed red, and screaming so loud that my head rattled. And that was how I ended up going to the hospital. My dad was driving, my mom in the back seat with me, staunched by my countless wounds. The car veered sharply around the fork in the road, and that's when I felt it. My water breaking. That's the last coherent memory I have of anything. I have blurry, distant flashes of being carried into the ER, doctors in blue surgical masks wheeling me into a room, shots injected into my arms that did nothing to lessen the searing torture flashing through my whole body. My own voice, impossibly deep, crying out in pain, speaking words that I don't understand. And Judas, showing up in the emergency room somehow, staring at me blankly as I heaved and shrieked and gave birth to his baby. I was faintly aware of the hours passing, twilight falling outside the window of the ward, and still it went on, and on, and on. I wanted to rip myself apart. I wanted to die. I didn't want to feel like this anymore, but it didn't stop. It went on and on and on. I remember being certain that I had died, that I was in hell, and that this was my punishment for sinning with Judas. Beyond that, I had one memory of the actual birth. It was the horrified look on the doctor's face when he pulled her out. I didn't see Maya, didn't get a glimpse of my baby girl, but I just remember the terror on her face, the way that the nurse fell back with a hand over her mouth. After that, there was darkness. It settled over me like a velvety blanket. I basked in the sweet relief of dreamless sleep, up until my eyes fluttered open and I found myself in a dark room, wearing my paper hospital gown stained with blood, and met Judas's dark eyes. "Hello," he said calmly, collectedly, and as if there was nothing out of the ordinary. "Hi." My voice sounded awful. I pushed a sweaty clump of hair out of my eyes. Judas looked different, more angular, a sharpened sword. Images of my own body sliced open flashed before me, and I shut my eyes hard, willing the dizziness to stop. "You did a good job feeding our child," he said. "Better than others. You never went for help, even when you were cutting off your own body parts." There was something in his voice I couldn't identify, so I looked up and I saw the adoration shining in his eyes. I realized that he was admiring me for it, impressed by how I'd hacked away at myself to satiate the desperate, dark compulsion in my chest. There was something so wrong with this boy. "Who are you?" I asked. That was when he changed fully. It was as if he had been waiting for me to ask all along, as if those 3 words were a charm to break him free of his prison. His human skin peeled away and fell into torn heaps at his feet, like a moth breaking out of its cocoon. Underneath that, I don't even know how to begin to describe it. How do I describe what infinity is, when I can't even comprehend it myself? Thousands of eyes, mottled silver and gold scales, 6 pairs of angelic white wings that looked as soft as velvet, a smile that was impossibly long, rows and rows and rows of teeth, but all of them different shapes and sizes, some razor sharp, others flat and dull, as if he'd taken them from different sources, and if they weren't his to begin with. I am everyone, he intoned in a voice that sounded just like what Maya's had in my head when I was hurting myself. I am no one. I am everything and I am nothing. I am the stuff of stars and of black holes. I am time itself, the endless ebb and flow of ocean waves, the darkness inside your head, the night terrors that haunt you in your sleep. I am fear. I am your joy. I am your God. My whole body trembled like a leaf. I was barely able to force out the words. What have you done with my baby? If possible, its jaws widened even further, revealing a sickly red tongue and a throat so black and endless I shuddered. My dear, it was never yours.
Nothing is ever yours. All of everything is mine. Even you.
It lunged at me. Its jaws closed around my body, and I jolted into consciousness. I was lying in a hospital bed. The room was dark except for a faint triangle of light filtered through the thin curtains over the window. Machines beeped next to me. Where was my baby? Where were my parents? My belly felt empty and hollow without Maya. I started to cry. By morning, I was losing my mind. When a nurse finally walked into the room, I wanted to weep from relief. Where is she? I begged her as she hurried to my side. Where is my child? The nurse's eyes softened in pity. Oh, honey, your son was stillborn. There was some unseen complications in the pregnancy, I'm afraid. He strangled himself with the umbilical cord by the time that he'd come out. I'm so sorry. My befuddled brain refused to comprehend. Unseen complications? That's right, the nurse said sadly, taking my hand. He was deformed. He wouldn't have survived anyways. And it's not your fault at all. He was missing some vital organs, honey. But your boy is in a better place. My boy? A son? That's right. She wiped her eyes hurriedly and clasped my hands. You're beautiful. Baby boy.